Hello, everyone. My name is Kenny Coogan, and I'm the Education Director for the International Carnivorous Plant Society. Today, we are going to be talking about Florida's carnivorous plants. I'm going to do part of the presentation. I'm in Tampa, and then Manny Herrera is also going to do part of the presentation, and he is a fourth generation Floridian from his mother's side. So he's been in Florida for his whole life, and he's been growing carnivorous plants for a very long time. I wanted to invite you to go to the International Carnivorous Plant Society's Facebook page. And if you go to the event tab, you can see that we have monthly happy hours and monthly webinars. Here's a sneak peek of what's coming up. And every year, the first Wednesday of May, we have World Carnivorous Plant Day. We just started this 2 years ago. If you go to our Facebook page or our YouTube channel, you can see that we put out about 24 to 26 videos on that day, one every hour. And it's from hobbyists and scientists and conservationists from all over the world who love carnivorous plants. Part of World Carnivorous Plant Day is also a photo contest. It is free to enter. All you have to do is be following the Facebook page or the Instagram page. And if you are one of the 3 winners, you get a 1-year membership to the International Carnivorous Plant Society. You can submit your photos from January through April. So right now it's August, so you can be taking pictures for next year's contest. You can also visit our website, carnivorousplants.org, to learn more. If you go there, you'll see that for May 2023, the next World Carnivorous Plant Day is Wednesday, May 3rd. It changes, the date changes, but it's always the first Wednesday. We wanted it to be in May because a lot of members are in the Northern Hemisphere, and that's when we got a lot of good-looking plants. We did not want to do it the first Saturday in May because that is World Naked Gardening Day, and we should not be combining those 2 things. Dangerous combination. If you want to support our conservation and our education initiatives, you could go to our website and buy these cool merch. And I don't know if you can see, but I'm wearing a Utricularia inflata shirt from the ICPS store. And proceeds from that help our Carnivores in the Classroom grant. Last year, we were able to fund 24 classrooms with $150 each to add carnivorous plants to their classroom. And it's August, from August 1st to August 31st is when the grant period is open. So if you are a teacher, or if you know of a teacher, please invite them to apply for the grant. And if you want to help out, you can go to carnivorousplants.org/donate, and you can donate to the Carnivores in the Classroom grant. Also in August, we are having a little fundraiser on Instagram. If you feel so obliged, please visit that. And without further ado, we are going to be talking about Florida's carnivorous plants. So I'm going to do the intro, and I'm going to tell you why we have so many species, why we have more species than other states in the United States. And then Manny is going to tell us the species specific details. So in recent years, we've had up to 34 species in Florida. One of them is probably extirpated, which means it doesn't exist in Florida, but you can still find that species in South America. So we don't say it's extinct because it's other places, but it's extirpated. So it's very hard to find in Florida. It's probably gone. And then one of the 34 species that we're going to talk about today is a non-native. Somebody started growing them in the early 70s and they're still in the panhandle. So to figure out why we have so many species, you have to go back to the Pleistocene era, which is about 2.5 million years ago. And at this time, to give you an idea, we had giant ground sloths roaming Tennessee. We had 7-foot, 7-inch tall camels roaming in the desert region. And we also had smilodons, which kind of looked like saber-toothed tigers. Florida was 2.5 to 3 times the width that it currently is, because the sea levels were 300 feet lower, and because all of the ice in the Arctic was soaking up the oceans, and the ice slowly came down, and that caused plants to migrate south, or some plants that had a random mutation were able to withstand the cold weather. So we have a bunch of plants moving down to the south. And as you can see, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but right here we have the warm temperate broadleaf forest. So we have seasons. The Gulf is moderating the temperature. So it's pretty cozy if you're a plant over here. And 20,000 years ago was the sweet spot for plants. And that's when we started getting speciation. So one Saracenia, it would migrate, it would have seeds, and then we started getting different species of Saracenia, Drosera, Pinguicula, things like that. And one of the reasons is because Florida has a lot of nutrient poor soils. We have a lot of sandy soils, and we have a lot of soggy soils, and carnivorous plants do well in those environments. And carnivorous plants are also able to withstand wildfires. And like I said, 20,000 years ago, we had even more wildfires than we currently do. And while carnivorous plants don't need wildfires, they benefit from them because the fires burn taller shrubs and trees and allow more light to reach the carnivorous plants. And carnivorous plants photosynthesize, but they don't do it as well or as efficiently as non-carnivorous plants, so that they need quite a bit of sunlight. So now we're getting into modern time, and what's a little, so it's getting warmer globally. Florida's getting a little smaller. The ice shelf is receding, and only a couple of plants are able to migrate back up north in the past 20,000 years. So today we have a Saracenia all the way in Canada, all the way over to around Michigan. Then we have Drosera filiformis up and down the East Coast. But out of the original 40 or so carnivorous plant species, only a couple of them have been able to migrate and handle the cold temperatures further north. So what still is puzzling scientists is why some species can expand their range and recolonize, while others are geographically restricted to this Florida glacial refuge that they retreated to 20,000 years ago. We have a lot of really expensive houses now, and we don't appreciate wildfires as historically speaking that we used to get. So we do a lot of fire suppression. But one thing that is good for a lot of carnivorous plants is that we're still frequently mowing underneath power lines and alongside the road. So if you come to Florida, that's a great place to see a lot of the species. And you can see in the back, this is right underneath the power line. And this photo is courtesy of Manny Herrera. So this is in Volusia County. So yeah, the mowing mimics fires because the mowing also gets rid of woody trees and woody plants, and that allows them to get a lot of sunlight. I want to go back a couple of hundred years ago to the 1700s. The Franciscan monks came over. They asked the Native Americans for maps and what they can expect when they explore the peninsula. And this is the map that they drew. And the Native Americans said that you could paddle your canoe from coast to coast because that's how saturated and swampy Florida was. And this probably could be true because in the mid 1700s, the water in the Everglades was 6 to 8 feet higher than it is today. And I don't know if it's on this map, but originally down here in the south part of Florida, they called it the River Glades. And that was on the map for about 50 years. And a glade is an open area. It's a treeless wetland. So they called it the River Glades because you're on the river and you see this, there's not a lot of trees. And then in 1823, that was the first time that probably the cartographers, they misspelled river and they changed it into ever. And that's why we call it the Everglades, because they just got lazy and they dropped one of the letters in river and then they changed the I to E. But that's the story. They changed it to Everglades. But it also makes sense because when you're in the Everglades, it's this vast openness and you have like the trees on the periphery. So what did the colonizers think when they came here to see this pristine habitat and animals that they've never seen before? They thought we should drain the swamp. And starting in the 1800s to the early 1900s, we tried to drain the Everglades multiple times. In 1904, Napoleon Bonaparte Broward, he saw the Florida wilderness as something that humans could and should control. And his slogan to win the governorship was "Water will run downhill." And he wanted to turn the Everglades into agriculture utopia. And he won the governorship because he said he was going to get rid of the Everglades so people could grow sugarcane and plantations. Frank Stoneman was a writer. He was the editor of the Miami Herald, and he criticized Broward's drainage plan. And he said it was impractical and inefficient, but he agreed that the Everglades was a wasteland, and he thought that it should be just left alone because it was going to be too expensive. Around the same time, in 1915, Mayman Jennings, she was the president of the Florida Federation of Women's Clubs and the chairwoman of the Preservation Committee. She started looking at surveys that were being done in the early 1800s in Paradise Key, and she realized that we have really unique flora and fauna, and she declared, she was the first woman to start declaring things as state parks, and she established these larger conservation movements. And she was saying that people will come from all over the world to just look at our plants and our animals. Around the same time, when most Floridians wanted the Native Americans to assimilate into American culture, Minnie Moore Wilson wanted to assimilate into theirs. And she saw how the Everglades and the Seminoles were intertwined. And she also wanted to protect the people and the wilderness. And she also agreed that people would come from all over the world. She said thousands of people would come a year to visit the land of flowers. And then in the 30s, we have this woman who's signing a book. She was 5'2" tall, and this is Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. She's the daughter of Frank Stoneman, and who said the wetlands and the Everglades was useless. She disagreed. She did a lot of research, and she said that it's a woman's business to be interested in the environment. It's an extended form of housekeeping. And she was a huge proponent of the Everglades. In 1947, she wrote The Everglades River of Grass. And then a few months later, the Everglades National Park was founded. And then she fought for wild places and wild things until she died. I think she was like 108 when she died. But in 1969, when she was 79 years old, she started the Friends of the Everglades. And you might be thinking, I came here to learn about carnivorous plants. Why are we learning about these women and the Everglades? Well, today the Everglades host 1 out of 3 of the state's carnivorous plant species, including some of them that are endangered or threatened. And it's always good to remember that diversity in species and who is in power is a benefit. So those women, along with many other women and men, are keeping vast amounts of Florida wild so these carnivorous plants can grow. And with that, Manny is going to tell us all about the plants that live in Florida. And the first one we're going to talk about is the most famous, but it is the non-native one. Go ahead, Manny.
All right. Can you still hear me?
Yep.
Okay. The Venus flytrap, that's I guess a good one to start with. I have seen this one in a few spots in one area of the Panhandle, actually 2 areas of the Panhandle. And One of the specific spots is unique because it grows in a very, very wet area where water runs downhill, and they're growing almost like on these sphagnum tufts on the sides of a very small stream, along with Saracenia leucophylla and some Saracenia flava and a couple hybrids of those two, and some sundews. Drosera capillaris is in there, and a couple Utrix. It also grows in a big open pine savanna with Saracenia flava and Saracenia and Pinguicula planifolia. These are the two main spots where it's found in Liberty County, Florida. Further west in the Panhandle, there is a spot on the side of a road where there are some growing. I don't know. I don't think it was the same individual who put these in the 70s. I imagine there are probably several individuals who have spread these around because it's the Venus flytrap and people want to see it growing closer to home. But as the map shows, it is native to southeast North Carolina and northeast South Carolina in a very small range, the only place in the world where they grow, and in the Florida Panhandle. So I'm assuming most people are familiar, but the trapping mechanism of the Venus flytrap, it's got 3 trigger hairs, or a couple trigger hairs on each side of the leaf of the trap, and it takes an insect to trigger or touch one of the hairs or 2 of the hairs twice before the trap will snap shut, as you can see here in the graphic. And the experts say that is done so that the trap is not triggered accidentally by the wind or by debris, by water. If you grow these at home, you will see sometimes if you water them overhead that they will snap shut because we're pouring the water directly over them. In nature, that usually doesn't happen. They'll get some rain, but the water normally will start coming up from the bottom gradually. So the trap's energy, the plant's energy is conserved to trap prey.
I included this one because I wanted to tell people that carnivorous plants, generally speaking, they have a much higher rate. They have a much higher leaf turnover rate than non-carnivorous plants. So the Venus flytrap can only digest about 2 to 4 meals per trap, and then they turn black. So if you see black on your Venus flytrap, it doesn't mean necessarily that it's going to die, but there should be new growth in the middle of the flytrap.
And it gives you reason to be that grumpy old man telling people not to touch the flytraps.
Yeah.
Saracenia are probably the most sought after or most known carnivorous plant in the state of Florida. Florida has the most the most diversity of Saracenia species. They mostly grow in the Panhandle or along that northern corridor of the state, but there is one species that comes down into the peninsula. And the way the Saracenia work is they're pitfall traps. They produce nectar on the rim. The nectar attracts insects or small animals, and they some of those small animals are attracted to the insects that the plant is attracting, and they come to the rim of the pitcher and they feed or hang out, and they fall in, and the interior of the pitcher walls are slippery to the feet of an insect, so they can't grasp on like they can on normal surfaces, and they eventually fall down to the bottom where they are digested. Those guys, the frogs, normally are able to hang out in there, and they can come out. So good. I'm a little old school, so it took me a while to get to Saracenia alabamensis wirii. Saracenia rubra wirii, as it used to be called. Saracenia alabamensis wirii, subspecies wirii, is found in the extreme northwest corner of the state. It primarily grows in southern Alabama, but being that plants don't respect artificial borders, it does cross over into the extreme northwest portion of the state. And there are a couple documented sites for this plant. Some of them are questionable or still under observation, but it can be stated with sufficient certainty that where the Saracenia alabamensis warea does grow in Florida. The main one of this, what used to be the rubra group, is Saracenia rubra subspecies golfensis. That's the main one that grows in Florida, and it is found in the western portion of the Panhandle, from mostly in Walton and Okaloosa counties and further west. I don't know if do you want to discuss the habitats for these?
Sure.
So Saracenia rubra golfensis is interesting. It's probably the Saracenia that I see most growing or tolerant of shade. I've seen it growing on these canal or stream banks where it's heavily shaded, and it grows right along the edge and into the water. And they're able to retain some color even in the shade, some venation, dark venation, and I've seen some nice purple plants even in these conditions. There are some that are green and grow in these conditions, and there's a green giant form that is on the Eglin Air Force Base, federal property, and these are growing straight in the water. I have photographs of some Saracenia rubra golfensis that are growing just on the surface of the water, in like a thin layer of muck on a pond inside the Eglin Air Force Base. Saracenia flava is right up there with, I would say, Saracenia leucophylla, which I'm sure we'll discuss next or soon. It's right up there as one of probably the king Saracenia in Florida due to its size. It's the largest or the tallest of all Saracenia, and they produce these very big, large trumpet shaped pitchers. That there's a lot of diversity within the species. You have all green to all green with a red splotch throat, which is a trademark, as you see there, trademark of Saracenia flava. They call it cutthroat. And then you have some that are veined, and you have some that are all red. So there's a lot of variety in this species. Probably the most variety of any of the Florida species. And this one exclusively grows, well, no, let me clarify. This one mostly grows in the Panhandle from Liberty County west. However, there are populations of it in far northeast Florida, in the Jacksonville area. I think most of those have probably been extirpated, but I'm not 100% sure. I personally have not seen it. I know there is a preserve where they're reported to be growing, and hopefully they're still there. I've not seen them myself. Saracenia leucophylla is the other celebrity pitcher plant from the state, and that's because it can grow very tall. These pitchers tend to be more slender, though there are some populations in the Apalachicola National Forest where they can be very robust and fat. But these are the ghost pitcher plant here is because they have the most white of all of the pitcher plants, and the white with the contrasting red venation makes them stand out quite a bit. Very desirable for collectors and for many, probably still for the floral industry, where the pitchers are harvested and used in floral arrangements. Saracenia leucophylla, again, this one is exclusively in the Panhandle, like most of the pitcher plants that grow in the state. And this one can be found from Franklin County all the way to the Alabama border. It does grow into Georgia, into southwest Georgia. Those populations, I'm not sure if they still exist. I've never seen them as well, but it does grow up a little bit farther east, just not in Florida. Saracenia minor is really I would say, the Florida pitcher plant, because it's got the widest range of all pitcher plants in Florida, and it is the most tolerant of a diversity of habitats in Florida. You can find it in very dry, kind of piney woods to very sopping wet floating islands in both Georgia and Florida. This one will grow. You can find this one it's been reported in Bay County, and I've seen the photos of it on private property in Bay County, which is pretty far west for the state. But officially it grows from Franklin County, Franklin, Liberty counties, east all the way across to the Atlantic, and then down into the peninsula, where it grows as far south as Okeechobee County, which Bruce Bednar is famous for the sites down there. And he took me when I was younger, and then there was an article in the ICPS written by Phil Sheridan, where Phil and Clyde took us to the where Bruce and Clyde took Phil and I to the site in Okeechobee County, where they were growing on a cow pasture, along with Pinguicula lutea and Drosera capillaris. And it also grows in neighboring St. Lucie County, so that makes these about the southernmost locations for any Saracenia. Saracenia psittacina is the underappreciated pitcher plant. I was having some conversations the other day with a couple growers who state that they will do all they can to protect its habitat, but they don't want to see it anywhere near their collections. And I never understood that, because I think Saracenia psittacina is probably, along with purpurea, they're probably the most unique and bizarre of pitcher plants. They kind of, the psittacina and purpurea, which is now rosea and purpurea, they're the standouts of the Saracenia world. Number one, they don't grow upright. They don't have the traditional pitchers with lids like the others, and minor, which is hooded. And Saracenia psittacina can also be considered semi-aquatic. Some of the others, they have the windows, which they fool an insect into thinking that once they go in, that they'll have many escape routes. But they quickly realize when they bump up against those windows that those are not, that they can't go through them, and they fall down into the pitcher. It's also, like I said, semi-aquatic, so it can try to keep up with the images. Sorry. So it's also capable of trapping some aquatic prey like tadpoles and shrimp when it's growing in particularly flooded or wet environments. These, again, I've seen them floating. They can grow on floating mats. I've even seen some just growing straight water, where the plant you could walk up to it and lift it up, and it's just growing in the water in the Apalachicola National Forest. So these will grow from Apalachicola, which is Liberty and Franklin counties. I believe there are some reports from Wauchula. I've never seen it there. It's a little further east, but it grows from that area all the way to the Alabama border and beyond, all the way to Mississippi. Saracenia rosea, formerly known as Saracenia purpurea, venosa, variety Chipola, or variety Lewis Burke, but it's now Saracenia rosea. It is again a panhandle, strictly panhandle dweller from that Franklin, Liberty County. Some reports in Wauchula counties as well. Wauchula County as well. Not seen it there, but it grows from that area further west into Mississippi. And this one is mostly grows in open grassy areas, very wet. It's unfortunately much harder to find in the panhandle now than it used to be. It used to be easy to spot on roadside ditches anywhere and from that range, but now it's extremely difficult to find in the western portion of the panhandle, where it's almost completely relegated to preserves now, as a lot of these plants are. And the rosea, like purpurea, it depends heavily on bacterial activity for digestion. It doesn't have a lid to rainwater from coming into the trap, into the pitcher. So the fluid that it has in the pitcher is it frequently gets diluted with rain and flooding. So it's heavily dependent on bacterial activity to help the breakdown of prey. And there are also some insects that are able, that their what do they call that? I'm sorry, their larval stages are able to resist the bacterial breakdown or any of the enzymes produced, and they're able to gestate in the pitcher, and that's a home for them. It's a natural habit, it's a little habitat that they have in there.
All right, so I'm assuming that a lot of our listeners are agreeing that those were really sexy Saracenia, but that's not really what I meant. I want to say that they're very promiscuous, like a college student. And in Florida, we have all of these naturally occurring hybrids in Florida and the neighboring states because of the way that their flowers, their sex organs are shaped. So in order to figure out why they hybridize so easily, if you do a little cross section of the flower, you can get an idea. So they're usually, Manny, what are they usually pollinated by? Bumblebees or different types of bees?
A lot of bees, and I'll tell you in my personal collection, my private collection, a lot of wasps frequent the flowers as well as the pitchers. But I do manage to find a lot of wasps inside. You know, sometimes you have an unpleasant surprise when you go to make a hybrid or look in there, a big wasp will fly out. Well, fortunately, they're not very aggressive, but you do startle them, and they don't like to be startled. But there are a lot of bumblebees that you know, some of these big fat bumblebees will be in there, and they'll be moving the whole flower about as they're fluttering their wings.
Yeah.
Moths, a lot of moths as well. You'll find a lot of moths in the flowers at night, particularly at night.
I'm reading the comments, and a couple of people are saying, Gregory says, this plant sleeps around. And then Jane goes, yep, they're genetically loose. So
right.
What happens is, let's say a wasp comes up. In order to get to the pollen and the nectar, they have to go underneath this part, which is the sepal, and then they go up and over this part, which is the stigma, and that's where the fertilization occurs. Then they're going to be running around getting the pollen, and you can see that the pollen has fallen on this upside down umbrella. And then in order to leave, they're gonna like parachute out of these tiny little holes that the petals create because they're drooping. So you can imagine the next flower that they visit, they're gonna repeat the process. And when they go up and over this stigma, they're gonna be scraping off the pollen from the last plant. And when Manny was listing the species, and you know, there's a lot of counties where their ranges overlap. So in bees and moths have pretty big distances. So that's how we can get these huge hybridized swarms. All right.
I'm sorry, some hybridize more easily than with each other than others, and that's largely due to the flowering cycle, seasons. Not the seasons, excuse me, the timing. Most of them, all of them flower primarily in the spring, but they flower at different times. So some of them you'll find their hybrids plenty, and some it's very, very difficult to find hybrids of.
So the next genera that we're going to talk about is Utricularia. And Utricularia means wine flask, leather bottle, or bagpipe. So you can imagine these are pretty good looking plants. And this is kind of what they look like. They kind of look like pond scum. But when you look up close, they're really beautiful. This photo is from Bose in Australia, but this is Utricularia gibba, which we have also in Florida. And they have these long waving trigger hairs. Utricularia can be epiphytic, terrestrial, or aquatic. In Florida, we don't have any epiphytic ones, but we do have 14 or 15 species that are aquatic and terrestrial. And what happens is, let's say there's like these little microorganisms in the water or in the soil, and they approach, those little trigger hairs kind of wave them on in. There's some sense associated with that. And then their door opens inwards, and it creates this little vacuum. It sucks in water in the plant. And then depending on the prey size, about 2 hours to 2 weeks it takes the trap to digest the prey. The bladders are the size of a period at like the end of a sentence to the size of a BB gun pellet. So they're pretty small, but if they get a mosquito larvae or a tadpole, what they'll do is they'll grab a hold of whatever they can. They'll start pumping in their digestive enzymes, and then they'll just eat the organism bit by bit. And because the trap resets so frequently, the animal can't escape. And as a vegetarian, I think this is awesome. It's nice that the plants are getting their revenge. So here's a couple of the species that we have in Florida. This is Utricularia gibba, but this is a trick because there's also Utricularia olivaceae here, down here. So if you're looking for them in the wild, it might be a little tricky. This is a full-grown Utricularia olivaceae flower. But if you find a little white Utricularia, it is the only white species in Florida. So that's one way you can identify it. Here is 2 more species. On the left, we have Utricularia inflata, and on the right, we have Utricularia radiata. They both have these little floating devices, and it's pretty tricky to identify them because it would be hard to figure out, like, oh, is this one just the baby of this one? But these are 2 different species. One way to tell the difference is that radiata has fewer arms, but in the picture on the right, I counted, and the radiata and the inflata, they all have the exact same number of arms. So that does not help you because the number of arms ranges from like 2 to 6, and then the other one is 4 to 10. So there's some overlap there. But another way to identify them is that one of them has cylindrical arms and the other species has tapered arms. So here's some more. Most of the species that we have yellow flowers. The one on the left is Utricularia subulata. And if you grow carnivorous plants, you probably are accidentally growing Utricularia subulata, because as John Endy told me, they are referred to as the herpes of the carnivorous plant world, because once you get them, you will not get rid of them. The way that you identify the yellow species there's terrestrial and aquatic, so you can separate those 2 groups. And then you can see some of them have horns, some of them have little red dots, some of them have ruffles. And then this one in the middle is the Amystenia, which is the one that's extirpated. So nobody has seen it in a long time, but they are in some South American countries. But we do have 2 pink-purple species left. The one on the left is purpurea, and then the more pink one with not as indented lobes is Respunata. All right, Manny. Here is your Pinguiculas.
Now, just to go, your Utricularia subulata, that
yeah,
I've also seen where the leaves, the pond scum portion of the plant gets so thick that sundews will grow on top of it. So that's it's definitely a very prolific plant. Pinguicula, the butterworts. These are also pretty widespread in the state. I think the entire state of Florida is covered in butterworts. Almost, it'd be great. But the entire state of Florida is home to at least 1 butterwort species, but mostly more. I know you see some here where you can tell by the maps that almost every single county, there may be an odd county here and there that just for some reason that doesn't have any or they've not found it. But I would say I have seen butterworts in every county that I've gone looking for plants in. And the butterworts are a flypaper trap, as it states there, and what they have is a they produce a sticky substance on the leaf, on the surface of the leaf, the exposed side of the leaf, and it also serves as an attractant to prey, the prey being normally smaller insects like gnats and midges and small flies. And when they land on the leaf to either rest or feed, they become mired in that substance. And as the insect struggles, it causes the plant to produce more of that substance and almost envelop the prey in it and suffocate it. And as the prey is dying or dies, the plant secretes an enzyme on the surface of the leaf that helps break down the prey. There's the old adage of the leaves turning in to assist in the digestion of the prey. I personally can't say that I've seen that all the time, but I'm sure that it's been observed by those who studied it more in depth. Two species here. I'll start with the rarer one, which is Pinguicula ionantha. Pinguicula ionantha is the only butterwort, the only North American butterwort that exclusively grows in Florida. It doesn't grow anywhere else in the world, and it's limited to a very, very small range in the southern portion of the Panhandle. Basically, I think only three or so counties, and it grows in usually very damp, very wet, damp roadside ditches or in bogs. It is federally endangered, so that's supposed to be protected. It's mostly growing in preserves, thankfully, but there are places where it is growing just on private property or public property that is not a preserve. So it's got a very precarious position. Its flowers they range from white to purple. I've seen. They've got anything anywhere in that color range and mixes thereof. Is it's got a widespread range, and it grows from southern North Carolina all the way down to Palm Beach County, and also far into the eastern part of the Panhandle. And it also has quite a diversity in flower color. It can go. I've seen white ones down in the southern range, and it can go to deep blue or purple, and there can be some with veins. This one, when not in flower, is almost indistinguishable from Pinguicula lutea, but for usually the habitat. Pinguicula caerulea tends to prefer wetter, moister habitats. You can find it. You can find them growing together, but the Pinguicula lutea tend to grow more uphill or more upland Florida, so it's not like it's much, but where it's a little drier and sandier and pinier, whereas the caerulea are in the wetter spots. So Pinguicula lutea, as we were discussing, also has a pretty wide range. It is from southern North Carolina all the way down to Palm Beach County. I have seen an herbarium sample of it for Broward County. I went looking. There's an herbarium specimen for Broward County for Pinguicula lutea and Drosera capillaris, which if you're a Floridian and you're into carnivorous plants, it's kind of a big deal because those are pretty far south for those two species. The Drosera capillaris location is now a bunch of houses. There are little green areas in between, but I could not access them. I don't know if there are any left. So Pinguicula lutea grows as far south as officially now Palm Beach County, and all the way into the entirety of the Panhandle and beyond into Mississippi. And it looks a lot like Pinguicula caerulea, except for the habitat. As you can see there, it's a fairly grassy, open, drier habitat, and the flowers are very, very yellow generally. But there are also white ones. I recently saw some white flowered ones in north central Florida. not far from the Gainesville area, a population of white flowered lutea. There are also some white flowered ones that grow in its southern, the southern extent of its range. Pinguicula pumila is the butterwort, the North American butterwort with the widest range. That one can be found from, does that grow in Virginia? I don't recall if it grows in Southern Virginia or not, but it definitely grows in almost the entirety of the North Carolina coast, all the way down the eastern seaboard through the entirety of the state of Florida. I mean, this one grows from every corner of the state. It grows from the western edge of the Panhandle all the way to the Jacksonville area, and then all the way through the peninsula into the Florida Keys. This is the only carnivorous plant. I'm not sure, and Kenny, you might know of some Utricularia grow in the Florida Keys. They might, but this one is one of the few carnivorous plants that extends into the Florida Keys, along with Catopsis burtoniana, which used to have a range in the Florida Keys. I'm not sure if it's still there, but Pinguicula pumila can still be found on at least one key, two keys, and in the Florida Everglades. And it's a diminutive butterwort. It tends to be usually about the size of a quarter. However, I have found some larger ones, roughly about maybe almost the size of my palm. I don't have very big hands, but almost the size of my palm. So that's pretty big for this species. And the biggest ones that I've seen are growing very wet and almost and in stagnant in very wet, swampy bogs in north central Florida and in the Jacksonville areas where I've found the biggest ones. With these, a lot of diversity of flower color as well, from white to dark to purple, rather said, lavender. There is, Bruce would be upset if I didn't mention it, there is a yellow flowered one. The variety, I think it's called Boswellii. I believe it's Boswellii. And it is a rare subspecies or variety of this species. I have only seen it in one area in, I guess that's technically Miami-Dade. It might be Monroe. It's in, no, it's Miami-Dade or Collier. It's the big cypress swamp, and in parts of the Everglades where the yellow flowered one is, I've seen it grow. I think it does have a few other locations, but I've only seen it there, and it is always exciting to find a yellow flowered pumila. Pinguicula planifolia, probably the most, in my opinion, the most striking and beautiful of the Pinguicula because of its color. It can almost turn into a very dark maroon. Interestingly enough, it's difficult to replicate that in cultivation. You'll find some very large. People compare it to starfish. Very large. You'll hear things like plate-sized or starfish-sized plants in the wild, and they can grow very, very wet, often underwater. They can grow drier too, where they tend to be smaller. The biggest ones I've seen are growing in muck, in a gray muck, very wet or underwater, and that's in the Apalachicola National Forest. This one exclusively grows in the Panhandle, west into Mississippi. I think it's very difficult to find as well due to habitat destruction. Primarily found in Liberty and Franklin counties is where I most easily found it. The flowers are like a, I'm bad with that. What is that? I call everything purple. It's lavender or what is that? Is that lilac? What would you call that?
I was going to say lavender.
Yeah, it's like a lavender color. They tend to be lavender colored, not a lot of differentiation. I think there's some whitish, lighter colored ones, but not a whole lot of color variety in the flowers.
Are you growing this species still?
I do grow it. I find that most native Pinguicula are difficult in cultivation for one reason or another, almost for no reason. They can do very well, and then just for seemingly no reason, just fade away. Even if you replicate its natural conditions or try to replicate the best you can, you never really fully can. So, but I do grow it. I do still have it. Actually, an interesting point. I have found all green forms of Pinguicula planifolia growing in the western part of the Panhandle. What county was that? I want to say it was Santa Rosa County. It's actually a well-known location. I won't repeat it here, but it's a well-known private land, but it's well-known. And because of the pitcher plants, but there are all green planifolia that grow in there. I don't know if they're officially albino. The flowers are white as well, so maybe they are officially albino, but it's an interesting note. Pinguicula primuliflora, going back to the cultivation point, I find Pinguicula primuliflora to be the easiest one to grow in cultivation.
That's why I included this photo.
Right. And the great thing, what we all love about Pinguicula primuliflora is its prolific nature. It produces plantlets very readily on the tips of the leaves, and it clumps and forms and it breaks off from the main growth point, forming these thick clumps like that in cultivation as well as in nature, as you can see there. Pinguicula planifolia is a panhandle dweller, like most. It does not grow into the peninsula. However, it does grow into south central Georgia, interestingly enough. There's a population there. Other than that, it grows from the western, maybe Walton County, or Walton, gotta look at my map now, but it's a western panhandle inhabitant, and it grows west into Mississippi. It tends to grow in water or on the edge of water, these little islets like this. You can find that in the panhandle, where it grows in streams and slow-moving streams on these little tufts or on the edges, and it forms these thick mats. You can also find it growing on the surface of the water. I frequently find it growing with Saracenia rubra golfensis and Drosera intermedia. Both of those, or all three of those, really like a lot of water, where they can grow very close to the edge of a body of water or on the surface of the water. And this one is a white, there is a white flowered form, which is rare, but it's mostly, mostly got a, I guess, a pinkish flower. The sundews, Drosera, also cover almost the entirety of the state. You know, some of these maps tend to be a little bit too generous. I don't think that there are any more in Broward or Miami-Dade counties. But other than that, they grow from Palm Beach north along the entire corridor, from Palm Beach west and up. And the primarily Drosera capillaris and Drosera brevifolia are the two most widespread species. I'm going to try not to get into too much that whole like capillaris intermedia thing. There are some capillaris that grow upright and very large that kind of tend people to think it's a Drosera intermedia. It's definitely not a Drosera intermedia, not a pure one. I believe that there has, I think Fernando Rivadavia mentioned that he had observed the seed, or someone had observed the seed, and it does look like that long arm or big, tall, or upright, excuse me, not tall, upright growing capillaris does look like it has some intermedia in its lineage. However, Drosera intermedia does not grow as far south into the peninsula. It grows up to Highlands County, I believe. Whereas a lot of these upright capillaris can be found further south. I find them a lot in St. Lucie, St. Lucie County sites that I've seen. It's probably the most glorious Drosera capillaris. They're still officially capillaris, whether they're a distant hybrid or not. More studies need to be done on this species. This is a really underappreciated and overlooked species because it's just so common in the southeast. Drosera capillaris and brevifolia, for that matter, we can tackle two at the same time. Will grow from, I think capillaris grows as far north as Maryland, once I read, all the way down the eastern seaboard through to Louisiana. And brevifolia has kind of a different disjunct it has some disjunct populations. Like I remember Schnell put a population in Oklahoma and in Tennessee. I've never seen those, but he does have those on his maps. But that one also grows from north. I think I don't know if it grows into Virginia, but it grows from North Carolina down all the way into Texas, East Texas, where it grows with some Saracenia alata. Brevifolia is a small. It's often confused. I know I'm kind of jumping around with the intermedia and the capillaris, but Brevifolia is often confused for capillaris or being a capillaris seedling. There are a few telltale ways to distinguish it. Normally, Brevifolia grows in drier habitats, though that's not 100% concrete because capillaris can grow in pretty fairly dry habitats where, much to our luck, it grows smaller in size, looking like a Brevifolia. But Brevifolia, the flower stalk, is glandular. You'll notice that there are tiny, tiny little like glands, almost like dew droplets on the flower stalk. And that's one way to distinguish it from capillaris. Brevifolia tends to be an annual as well. It'll grow, set flowers, set seed, and then die off and come back in the next season or maybe even a couple seasons, depending on the conditions, because it grows in drier conditions. It can go through drought where the plant dies off and comes back later when the conditions are more suitable. But the same can be said for capillaris. These guys grow, their ranges overlap in the state. Almost the entirety of their ranges in Florida overlap. I would say everywhere the capillaris grows in Florida, you will find Brevifolia. Drosera intermedia is my my muse here in the state because I'm so obsessed with finding it in the peninsula because it's, and Bruce Bedner knows about this. I'm always pestering him about going looking for it in the Florida Peninsula. Bruce is probably the person who knows the most about the ranges and the sites for carnivorous plants and definitely in Florida and probably elsewhere. So this one is primarily found in the Panhandle. Once you cross into Bay County, you almost this one becomes almost as common as capillaris is in the rest of the state. And you can find it in roadside wet ditches, almost any wet open grassy area in Florida is home to a sundew, or definitely bladderworts. But the sundews being mostly intermedia in the western part of the Panhandle, and capillaris being the rest of the state. Intermedia is known, it's distinguished because it grows upright. It exclusively grows upright, except maybe when a very small seedling. And the leaves are spatulate, kind of spoon spatulate shaped, unlike capillaris, which tends to be more rounded. Intermedia can also get very big. The biggest ones are growing in wetter conditions, where they're growing either on the surface of the water or partially under the water, and they get to be very, very large size. I've seen deep, deep purple plants in southern Alabama, but they can have a lot of different color. This is a standard kind of look here, like sundew look, but they can go from dark red or purple to even green. There are albino forms. The flowers are white, and they, unlike capillaris and Brevifolia, they will form a winter hibernaculum when they go dormant. The other ones will either keep growing or die off and come back the next season. These guys will go dormant. They'll form a hibernaculum or a hibernacula. I forget the plural, and I think it's hibernacula is singular and hibernaculum is plural, right?
That sounds right.
Yeah, sounds right. You guys know what I mean. But like I was saying, that I'm sorry, before we cross, this one does grow into the peninsula. It's far south of Highland County, but it's extremely hard to find in the peninsula. I've gone chasing it based on leads, and I've only managed to find it in the peninsula in one location, actually my county, Marion County. But The last time I saw it, it took a lot of trekking through a large lake. Canoe part of the way, it was almost like something out of a myth. I had to canoe part of the way, then trek while dragging the canoe through lily pads to get to a little floating island, mostly consisting of Utricularia subulata, where I could walk. I think I posted my brief clip on the ICPS Facebook page, where you're walking on an island of muck and subulata, and these guys are growing on it. Hard to find in the peninsula, unfortunately. Drosera filiformis, variety Floridana. This one is, I've been growing carnivorous plants since I was about 12, so it's a long time, 30 years or so now. And most of my early years of growing carnivorous plants, this plant, Drosera filiformis, was strictly a northern, meaning it was from the northeastern United States, southern Canada, all the way down to North Carolina. I had always heard these like mythical populations that existed in the Panhandle. I believe people did know about them, and Bruce may be one that did know about it, but you know they for good reason kept mum about it. And I first saw these, I think, in the year 2000 with the late Bob McMorris. I was able to see one of these habitats. They grow in just a few pockets in the Panhandle, mostly Washington County. I think there might be another county that they extend into, but mostly Washington County, where one of the habitats is, and it's the photo on the left, where it's just like a sinkhole consisting almost entirely of white sand, and the water just comes to the surface. And there's Pinguicula planifolia growing there, and a lot of Utrix and Drosera capillaris. And the plants get a deep, deep red in that location. It does grow with Drosera tracei in a couple locations, and they hybridize. And the hybrid has the unfortunate name of Drosera californica, just because it was hybridized first, or it was first named due to a horticulturally made cross. But there are quite a few of us who are in opposition to that name, because nothing against the state of California. It's just that it doesn't have anything to do with the plant. The plant is exclusively found in Florida, the hybrid, I should say. So it should not be named after another state. This is Drosera tracei. Used to be formerly Drosera filiformis, variety tracei or subspecies tracei. I can't recall the nomenclature it used to be part of filiformis. Now it's its own species, and these are distinguished because they tend to be a lot bigger. And they are all green, golden, yellow kind of color, mostly with a pink flower along with filiformis, but there are some albino forms of tracei. I think there's an albino filiformis, a white flowered one. I think there's even a red one. But these guys mostly exclusively pink flowered, but there's some white flowered ones. These also just grow in the Florida Panhandle from mostly Liberty and Franklin, farther west into Mississippi. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they extend into southwest Georgia, along with that Leucophylla population. I have never seen them. I've never really gone. I've looked a bit in the southwest Georgia area, but I've never seen anything other than what's mostly growing there. And these guys grow from dry, sandy, piney woods to very wet conditions. They generally prefer open, kind of mucky soil. They're very, very common in the Panhandle. I think that there are some spots in the western part of the Panhandle where I've seen them in the ditches, like in front of buildings, and along with Drosera intermedia and capillaris and Utrix, in front of like car dealerships, people's homes. They're just growing in that little strip of wet ditch.
All right, Manny, the last species.
The last one. Now, before you mentioned that Utricularia, I thought you were, when you said the extirpated species in Florida, I thought you were going to say it was this. And I was going to be ready to say, no, it's not, because it isn't. Almost, probably almost, but it's not. So Catopsis proteroniana is one of the few carnivorous bromeliads. Few for now. I know the studies are still ongoing on a lot of them. And I hope they find more, because bromeliads should all be carnivorous. I wish they all were. And then we could have beautiful land, these landscaping bromeliads that they use in South Florida. Then they could be carnivorous plants. This one is native to northern South America, Guyana. I believe it grows in Guyana and Venezuela. Definitely Venezuela. And then it grows north and through Central America and parts of Mexico and the Caribbean. In Cuba, primarily, there are a few populations that have made it into cultivation. And that's the primary one, if I'm not mistaken, that's in cultivation, is the Cuban one for some reason. I don't know if there are any Venezuelan ones in cultivation. And then then they do extend into southern Florida. There are different theories as to how they got there. Hurricane winds being one of the theories that brought over the seed. And they grew or grow in the Florida Keys. I've never seen them at the Keys, so I believe I can see where they would grow in parts of one primary key, the biggest, one of the bigger keys where it's suitable for carnivorous plants, and maybe the key closest to the state, to the mainland. But it definitely grows in the Florida Everglades. Difficult to spot if you don't know where to look. But it's in there, and I know that it is reported. I have a book about the corkscrew swamp where it is recorded there, and I haven't seen photographs. I'm not sure if it still grows in Southwest Florida on that coast, and it probably grew farther north. Not that I have seen, not frost tolerant. So I think the cutoff would probably be just that Naples kind of Palm Beach line. I don't think it would grow Collier, Lee County, if it stayed in half like that. I think that would be it. I don't think it would extend farther or extended farther north. But either way, it had a wider range within it was found more easily within its range in the state, but it's extremely rare now. I have heard of it growing on private property in Miami-Dade County. But it mostly grows in preserved land, Florida Everglades and the big cypress preserves.
And they're found in very sunny locations.
Very sunny, grow there. Yeah, sorry, could go more into it a little bit. They're epiphytic. In cultivation, they can be grown in pots. If you grow it in kind of a chunky woody mix, although I've heard some people grow it in typical carnivorous plant mix. I don't know how, but I haven't done it. But I happen to grow the Florida Florida plant and the Cuban one, and they are noticeably different. I don't know if it was Kenny, were you over that we were discussing the difference, or maybe it was someone I know you've been over.
We weren't discussing the difference, but I did see them.
They are noticeably different, even though being the same species. And they, like the other carnivorous bromeliads, produce, like other bromeliads in general, produce powdery leaves. And the powder is said to cause prey and insects to slide down into the soupy water that it and most bromeliads have. Accumulation of rainwater. The only difference being that these carnivorous bromeliads are said to are able to digest or derive nutrients from the organic matter that falls in there and is broken down. I don't really remember off the top of my head. I think in order for it to be carnivorous, they had to have said that it does. Well, no, it just has to be able to absorb nutrients. I think from the stuff. I don't think it has to produce enzymes. I don't really remember right now if they do produce enzymes or not, or if it's bacterial breakdown. But it's probably safe to say it's a combination of both. Like Pinguicula, like Saracenia, purpurea, and rosea.
All right, very good. And that concludes our tour of Florida with over 30 species that can be found here in our state. So we just have a couple more minutes. There was lots of conversations going on in the chat, but if you guys have any questions for Manny or myself, please feel free to ask. I will ask you, Manny, one question that Jane had. She wanted to know why you think the Saracenia evolved to have that umbrella flower that catches the pollen.
And I did put an answer in there briefly, but I'll say it again. I'm definitely not the expert on the complete science of these plants, but I believe from a practical standpoint of growing them for many years and observing them in the wild, it appears that the umbrella is meant to capture the pollen as it falls, and the pollen will accumulate on the inside of that umbrella, and it makes for more accessibility for the pollinator
yeah.
to have contact with it and then carry it from there.
That's what I would have said.
I don't know if it serves any purpose. I've often pondered if it serves any purpose in capturing the seed. I don't see why the plant would want, not that the plant thinks, but you know what I mean. I'm using layman's terms here. Why the plant would want the seed to stay accumulated in the umbrella, I don't see a reason for that. I think most plants are designed for the seed to be spread out.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure. When the pods do open, the seed pods do ripen and open. Thankfully, in cultivation, a lot of the seed does stay in that umbrella. But then the umbrella does an interesting thing as the flower matures, where it's normally like this, it kind of goes out like that. So maybe the seed gets accumulated in there, and then the umbrella, that portion goes out and it disperses the seed that way. I'm not sure. Somebody who's probably a botanist or trained in observing that probably have the answer. I haven't seen it either much in many of the carnivorous plant books. I haven't seen much on that particular topic.
All right, well, if you guys don't have any other questions, we're going to head out. I do want to mention that a lot of the photos in this presentation were from Manny, and we were talking about Bruce Bednar, but a lot of the photos in this presentation were also from Karen Henningsen. So thank you, Karen.
And I was going to mention when you were doing your intro that the Saracenia minor and the power lines, I was going to mention that's if Bruce Bednar will know where that is very well. As I was told about that place by him, Clyde. Clyde Bramlett is the deceased, famous, well-known Clyde Bramlett. He's deceased. He was the owner of Orgel's Orchids, and many of us had our first carnivorous plants were from him or Bruce. They are the two most long-time carnivorous plant growers and gurus of the state. That spot is, unfortunately, I was told, has been bulldozed where those Saracenia minor are. Bruce may know if he's been there more recently. I haven't been in a couple of years, but it's sad to say that beautiful area which kind of went with endless Saracenia minor, I was told, is now an endless trench that has been bulldozed. So hopefully they come back and they're somewhere nearby. I know there are a few in nearby areas, but that's very heartbreaking.
Yes. So all the more reason to want to protect lands and conserve these very interesting plants. Also, Bruce and Manny they both contributed and volunteered a video for World's Carnivorous Plant Day, so you guys can just click to another video and learn more about Florida's carnivorous plants and growing plants in tropical, subtropical areas. I want to thank everyone for attending. This is going to be posted in about a week on our social media pages. And then in September, we have more exciting webinars and happy hours. And for happy hours, you just bring a drink to your computer and a plant. It's supposed to be an hour long. We almost always talk for like an hour and a half, 2 hours, because people just like sharing what they're growing. We can ask questions. We can get you answers. And it's just like nice to have camaraderie. And as always, but very much appreciated in the chat, lots of people are saying, thank you for a great webinar.
Thank you for putting these together. I really appreciate, we appreciate that. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, Manny. And everyone else have a great day.
You too.
The International Carnivorous Plant Society wants you to be successful with your plants. We welcome growers just getting started all the way through professional scientists. We started an annual World Carnivorous Plant Day to celebrate these spectacular plants. Take a look around our website and you'll find historic documents about carnivorous plants, growing guides, free educational resources, and more. Have questions? Ask. We don't bite, but our plants do.